On the quiet edge of town, where cracked sidewalks faded into overgrown lots, stood an aging, mustard yellow house with its shutters half hanging and weeds choking its path. Most people passed by without giving it a second glance. But for David, a 52-year-old mechanic who recently moved into the neighborhood, the house was impossible to ignore, not because of how it looked, but because of the sound. It started on his third night, a soft clinking, like marbles rolling across a hardwood floor. At first, David thought it was just the house settling, old pipes, maybe raccoons in the attic. But the sound didn't come from above. It came from the walls, and always just after midnight. Sharp, rolling, deliberate. He'd sit on his couch, staring at the wallpaper as if it would peel itself open and reveal the source. It didn't. It never did. By the end of the first week, David's sleep had deteriorated into hour-long naps, filled with twisted dreams. In one of them, he was a child again, standing in his grandmother's hallway, staring at a pile of glass marbles that moved on their own. When he woke up, he found one lying on the carpet beside his bed, a cloudy blue one, ice cold to the touch. David stood up and backed away slowly, goosebumps racing up his arms. He lived alone, no kids, no visitors. He picked up the marble with a trembling hand and threw it in the trash. But the next night, there were two, one on the windowsill, another inside his shoe. Both were different colors, deep green and blood red. The clinking in the walls continued, louder, closer. He stopped going to work. He stopped shaving. Days blended into nights, and the house became a prison. David began leaving his lights on, blasting the television at full volume, and still, he heard the sound. The clinking never stopped. Sometimes it was faint, like whispering rain. Other times it was sharp and chaotic, like dozens of marbles crashing to the floor in a frenzy. He installed cameras, 4 of them, 1 in the bedroom, 2 in the hallway, 1 in the living room. The footage showed nothing, or almost nothing. At 3:12 a.m., every night, the screen would go black for exactly 11 seconds. When the video returned, small piles of marbles would appear in frame, on the couch, the stairs, even his chest while he slept. He watched himself breathing, unaware. David tried everything: exorcists, pest control, moving out temporarily. He stayed with his sister across town for 3 days. The clinking followed him there, echoing through her guest bedroom. She never heard it, but David didn't sleep. On the second night, she walked into his room and screamed. Dozens of marbles were rolling across the bed, moving without touching each other, forming a perfect circle around his head. He returned to the house, defeated and terrified. He walked straight into the basement, took a hammer, and started breaking into the walls. Dust and wooden splinters clouded the air. Behind one of the panels, he found an old tin box wrapped in newspaper. Inside, hundreds of marbles, each one unique but all cloudy, each one freezing cold. David didn't know why he cried when he touched the marbles, but something about them felt familiar, like they had seen things he couldn't remember, like they knew him. That night, the dreams returned with unbearable clarity. Children, dozens of them, staring from behind foggy glass panes, trapped, silent, each holding a marble in their mouth. He woke up gasping, covered in sweat. The box of marbles now sat on his nightstand, though he remembered leaving it in the basement. His breath fogged up as if it were the middle of winter. Though the room was warm, the clinking began again, but this time it was louder than ever, as if coming from inside his own skull. David stopped trying to make sense of it. He started collecting the marbles, placing them into jars, labeling them with dates and times. The more he collected, the more he remembered. Snippets of things he was sure had never happened to him. Dragging someone into a crawl space, whispering names that weren't his, locking doors that should have never been closed. He wrote it all down, covering his walls in pages of notes, diagrams, and marble arrangements. He wasn't sure if he was going mad, or if he was simply waking up to something ancient, something buried. His hands began to tremble constantly, and sometimes he caught glimpses of children in the corners of his eyes, vanishing as soon as he turned. Then came the night he found the 7th jar shattered on the floor. He didn't remember dropping it, but the marbles were gone, not rolled under furniture, gone, and in their place, a small handprint, too small to be his, etched into the wood with something sharp, almost claw-like. The clinking became unbearable. He stuffed tissues into his ears. He screamed until his voice gave out, but the sound pushed through everything. The marbles were no longer just things. They were eyes. They were watching him, and when he looked too long into them, he swore he saw himself doing things he couldn't understand, hurting people, laughing, then crying. David boarded up every window. He nailed the doors shut, but the marbles kept appearing. In the fridge, inside pillowcases. Once he found one inside a sealed jar of peanut butter. They were invading him. One night he woke choking, coughing up a deep black sphere, a marble, slick with saliva. He didn't sleep again after that. The next day, his neighbor called the police after hearing glass shatter and frantic screaming. They found the house empty, no sign of David, but they found marbles, hundreds of them, arranged in spirals all over the floors, walls, ceilings, cold to the touch. And in the center of the living room, written in jagged handwriting, "I remember now." To this day, no one lives in the house. Real estate agents won't take the listing. Local kids dare each other to knock on the door, but none do it twice. Every now and then, people claim to hear the clinking sound while walking their dogs at night. A soft rolling noise, faint but deliberate. David's sister refuses to talk about him. His name has become a whisper, his face forgotten. But sometimes, near the edge of town, blue and green marbles appear on driveways, in mailboxes, or on the steps of abandoned homes, always cloudy, always ice cold, and always in odd numbers. If you pick one up, you may dream of foggy rooms, of tiny voices calling out from behind the glass, of marbles rolling endlessly down invisible hallways. Some say it's just a story, others aren't so sure, and somewhere, buried in a dusty box no one dares to open, David's collection waits to be completed, but it never ends with just one. It started with a sound, a tiny clink, barely audible, rolling across the floorboards of a nearly empty room. Walter turned his head slowly, eyes narrowing toward the corner of the attic. The sun had just dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty wooden planks. He had been up there organizing boxes that hadn't been touched since his mother passed away last spring. He wasn't expecting anything to move. He stared for a moment longer. Nothing. Maybe a nail had shifted, or a bug had knocked something over. But then it happened again, closer this time. A soft clink, clink, followed by the unmistakable roll of a glass marble. spinning in a lazy arc before coming to a stop near his boot. Walter blinked. His mouth opened slightly. He hadn't seen a marble since he was a child. He certainly hadn't brought one up here. He leaned down slowly, picking it up. The marble was heavier than expected, smooth but oddly warm. Swirling inside the glass was a foggy grey mist, not the colourful streaks he remembered from childhood. A strange cold travelled up his fingers despite its warmth. For a long moment, he just stared at it. Then, a chill swept over him. "All right, that's enough for today," he mumbled to himself and stood up quickly, placing the marble on a nearby crate. But as he turned toward the stairs, he heard it again. Clink, clink, clink. He spun around. 3 more marbles now lay in a trail from the crate to the attic's dark corner. He hadn't seen them roll. They were just there. Walter's heart kicked against his ribs. "This is ridiculous," he whispered. He took 1 step forward, squinting into the shadow. The attic corner was darker than the rest, unusually so. He bent to pick up another marble, but before his hand touched it, all 4 marbles began to roll, not toward him, not away. They rolled in a circle, slowly, deliberately, around each other like planets in orbit. He stumbled backward, his breath caught in his throat. A deep groan echoed from the floorboards beneath him. He bolted down the stairs, slamming the attic door shut behind him. His wife, Clara, looked up from the kitchen table below, startled. "What's wrong?" she asked. "There's something weird in the attic," he muttered. "Marbles, they're moving on their own." She laughed gently, but Walter didn't. His face was pale. His hands shook. That night he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the sound. Clink, clink, clink. Echoing in his mind like a chant. He finally gave up, rising from bed and creeping back to the attic, flashlight in hand. The door creaked open with hesitation. Silence. He stepped inside slowly, shining the light around. Nothing moved. The marbles were gone. All the crates looked undisturbed, but then his foot nudged something small and hard. He pointed the flashlight down. 12 marbles, perfectly aligned in a spiral. His mouth went dry. Walter backed away, the flashlight flickering. He turned to leave, but the door slammed shut on its own. He rushed to open it, but it wouldn't budge. His breathing quickened. Then, from behind him, he heard whispering, soft and indecipherable, but definitely there. He turned slowly, his back against the door. In the center of the attic, the spiral of marbles was gone. In its place stood a child, or something shaped like one, barefoot, its head bowed, and in its hand, a bag filled with marbles. The bag wriggled. "Who are you?" Walter rasped. The child looked up. Its face was hollow, skin like wax, eyes like obsidian. It opened its mouth, but instead of words, a stream of marbles spilled out, clattering to the floor, spreading in all directions. Some bounced off the walls. Others rolled in precise formations. Walter screamed. He threw himself at the door again, pounding it, kicking it. From behind, he heard the marbles getting louder, closer. One struck his ankle, then another, then another. They hit with more force than expected, like tiny fists. The attic door burst open suddenly. Clara was there, pulling him out, eyes wide with panic. "What the hell's going on?" she shouted. He tried to explain. He pointed, but the attic was still again, empty, not a marble in sight. "I swear it was there. The kid, the marbles, they moved, they hit me." His voice cracked. Clara searched his face. "You're sweating like crazy." "Maybe it's a panic attack," she whispered. "No, it's not that," Walter insisted. "I know what I saw. They locked the attic door that night." Walter took sleeping pills just to quiet his mind, but as he drifted off, he felt something beneath his pillow. He reached under and pulled out a marble, the same swirling grey mist. Clara screamed from the hallway. He ran to her. She stood at the bathroom door, pale and frozen. The mirror had dozens of marbles pressed against the glass. Inside the glass, as if trapped in the reflection, they left the house the next day, booked a motel, called a priest, called a medium. Both refused to enter the house once they arrived. The medium said only one word after walking near the attic: "Bound." Walter couldn't sleep for days. When he finally returned to grab a few belongings, he went up one last time. The attic was empty, but painted crudely on the floor in a ring of dried brown was a child's drawing of a house, with hundreds of marbles where the windows should be. They sold the house, moved 3 states away, but the marbles didn't stop. One appeared in their mailbox a week later, another in Clara's shoe, then in the engine of their car. Always the same grey mist swirling inside. Walter eventually stopped talking. He just sat on the edge of the bed most days, clutching one of the marbles, whispering to it like an old friend. Clara tried to get help, but every therapist they visited ended up backing out, without explanation. And then, one morning, Walter was gone. No note, no sign of forced entry, just a marble left on the pillow. It was cracked in the middle, and inside that crack, something blinked. It started with a sound, a simple, innocent sound, a marble rolling on a wooden floor, late at night, when the house was silent, and even the old radiator had gone quiet. David heard it from the hallway. He sat up in bed, heart suddenly racing, trying to convince himself it was nothing. Maybe something fell from the dresser. Maybe the neighbors were doing something strange again. But the sound repeated, slow, deliberate, a tiny sphere tapping and spinning against wood, echoing in the silence like a mocking whisper. He turned on the bedside lamp. The dim orange light threw long shadows across the room, distorting the corners. He stepped out of bed, barefoot, the floor cold beneath him. As he stepped into the hallway, the sound stopped. He held his breath. Nothing moved. Then he saw it, a small green marble sitting perfectly still at the center of the corridor. His throat went dry. David hadn't seen marbles since childhood, and yet here it was, pristine, glowing faintly in the warm light. He crouched and picked it up, cold, smooth, familiar in a way that sent a chill through his spine. He remembered having one just like it when he was 7. He blinked. Could it be the same one? The next morning, he asked his wife, Julia, if she had dropped anything. "No," she said, frowning. "What kind of sound?" "A marble, rolling." She chuckled nervously. "In this house?" David shrugged, unsure himself. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe he dreamt it. But he kept the marble on his nightstand, unsure why he didn't just toss it. 2 nights later, the sound returned. This time, louder, faster. Julia woke up too. "You hear that?" he whispered. She nodded, wide-eyed. "It's rolling." They got out of bed together. This time, 2 marbles waited at the end of the hall, one green, the other red. David's breath hitched. Julia stepped back. "This is a prank, right?" she asked, voice shaking. David said nothing. He bent down, picked them up. cold as before, but something else. His fingers tingled like tiny vibrations under the glass. The next morning, Julia insisted they speak to the landlord, but the old man upstairs just grinned toothlessly. Marbles, eh? Used to be a boy lived in that flat. Years ago, strange one, kept to himself. Always playing marbles at night, until he disappeared. David's stomach churned. Disappeared? They never found him. Just gone. Room locked from the inside. One marble left on his pillow. Julia turned pale. Why didn't you tell us? The old man laughed. Didn't think it mattered. Nobody stays long anyway. David tried to throw the marbles away. He walked 3 blocks and dropped them into a drain. That night, he slept uneasily. No sound, no marble. But in the morning, 3 marbles on his nightstand. He gasped. Julia screamed. David, what's happening? He had no answer. His hands trembled. One of the marbles had a crack in it now, thin, like a fracture in reality itself. Inside it, a faint black mist swirled. They tried to leave, packed bags, called a cab, but every time they stepped outside the building, they found themselves back at their apartment door. Julia sobbed. David slammed his fists against the walls. This isn't real. This can't be real. That night, they slept together on the couch, but neither truly slept. The sound came again, rolling, but now it echoed from every wall, every corner, a maddening chorus of glass spheres. David lost track of days. Time looped strangely. Sometimes the sun rose, sometimes it didn't. Marbles kept appearing, under pillows, in their shoes, inside the fridge. Different colours now. Some with swirling clouds inside. Others with what looked like eyes, tiny and shifting. Julia stopped speaking. She just stared, clutching a cracked marble in her palm. Don't let them break, she whispered once. Why? He asked. They let it out. David noticed something new. When he stared into the marbles long enough, he saw things, not reflections, scenes. Rooms from the apartment, but wrong, darker, twisted. He once saw himself sleeping while a shadowy figure stood over him, watching, smiling. He dropped the marble. It shattered. The room fell silent. Then the whispering began. The shadows grew longer. Reality bent. David's skin itched constantly, as if crawling with invisible insects. Julia stopped eating. She spoke to the marbles, called them names, cried when one disappeared. David tried to smash them all, but for each he broke, 2 more appeared. The apartment filled with them. They rolled everywhere, across the floor, down from shelves, clinking in the dark. Julia disappeared one night. No sound, no trace. Just her nightgown on the floor, and a single black marble beside it. David screamed until his throat bled. Then he sat down and laughed. Now he sits every night in silence, watching the marbles roll, waiting. One of them will call his name soon. He can hear the beginnings of it now, in the tapping rhythm of glass on wood.